Big shouts out to TJ and Elia for becoming new patrons this week. Heads up, this week's episode is about an unhealthy relationship with alcohol. Please take care of yourself, friend. My name is Callie Wright, and this is Queersplaining. I hung out with this kid named Billy when I was in high school. He was like the chief bad kid. Started smoking cigarettes at like 12, 13, always had drugs around. He had a tough childhood and was mostly raised by his grandparents. They took good care of his physical needs, but they were just too tired to mess with the rest. He did basically whatever he wanted. This meant that when you wanted to get drunk or high and play video games and listen to loud music, you would go to Billy's house. We were gearing up to party one night. Billy's grandpa took us out to buy alcohol. We walked into the liquor aisle of the store and told him what we wanted. It was June of 2000. I was 16 years old. And I know this because we had just gotten the Deftones' White Pony record. We were fucking stoked. We were going to play that record all night, play some PlayStation, get drunk as fuck, and fall asleep at like 4 a.m. Billy's grandpa's basement was legendary. In our friend group, when we said the basement, we knew which one we were talking about. Wood-paneled walls, vinyl floor that was sticky from half-clean soda spills. It smelled like half-finished beer bottles and cigarettes. Billy's grandparents had furnished it with a couch, a recliner, some bunk beds, and a cot. It was a pretty epic teenage hang spot. That night wasn't the first time I ever drank, but it was the first time I drank liquor. Billy, me, and a few other friends double-fisted a 2-liter of Pepsi and a bottle of Southern Comfort until both were gone. And it was too much. I ran to the bathroom feeling like I was gonna puke. Billy came in to look after me, and he kept telling me not to let myself puke if I could stop it. He said I'd lose alcohol and get less drunk, and I got the sense he felt like that was a bad thing. Eventually, Billy left when I said I was gonna be okay. I still had to pee, so I did that. When I went to wash my hands, I looked in the mirror, drenched in sweat. The light was dim, but I could still see how red my face was. Who the fuck wants to feel like this? I'm supposed to be having fun, and I am not fucking having fun. In that moment, I wanted nothing more than to not be drunk anymore. But it doesn't work like that. I had to live with it for the night. I decided I wasn't going to do that again. I wasn't making a lifetime commitment or anything. I was 16. I knew better. But I definitely was like, yeah, this isn't for me. And then I thought about everyone in my family who was a recovering alcoholic, and that is almost all of them. I remembered the uncle who spent time in prison for drugs, and I thought, man, this shit is not for me. I fell asleep that night thinking about how bad that hangover was going to be. Billy was pretty sure I was going to feel like shit in the morning, but he said he had some liquor stashed to get rid of the hangover. And I was too tired to be like, no, I'm not fucking doing that. And I fell asleep while they were still playing that Deftones record on repeat. I avoided a hangover, miraculously, but I still thought I was kind of done with drinking, at least until I was older. And a few years later, I got into hardcore music and I found straight edge. If you don't know what that is, it's this like punk/hardcore subculture that's all about abstinence from drugs, alcohol, smoking, premarital sex. I even stopped drinking caffeine. The culture was pretty shitty and puritanical looking back on it, but I do think it saved me from making some pretty bad decisions. I've always been an impulsive person. The bad drinking night I had and the social affirmation I got from being around a bunch of other straight edge kids kept me from ever wanting to mess with drugs or alcohol for a very long time. At some point in my mid to late 20s, I sort of stopped caring about calling myself straight edge. I'd left that scene behind. Most of the straight edge bands I listened to broke up, and the idea of being a part of that particular subculture just stopped appealing to me. But all my friends knew me as someone who didn't drink, and I still knew myself as someone who didn't drink or do drugs, so none of my friends ever offered alcohol, let alone pressured me into it. One night, one of my best friends, someone else who was straight edge in high school, sent me a text. He confessed to me that he really wanted to just go have a beer with his coworkers because that was a thing his coworkers did. And the tone of the conversation, it was like the same tone and mood as when I came out to him as trans. He was worried that I was going to judge him or think less of him, like he was confessing this deep, dark secret. And I was like, this is fucking silly. Like, dude, if you want to go have a beer with your coworkers, why do you feel bad about that? That's ridiculous. And I thought to myself, you know what? At some point, I might want to go have a beer with my friends. And I did. When I started hanging around with the atheist crowd, none of them knew me as a person who didn't drink. So when we'd hang out, they'd offer me stuff, just like they'd offer it to anyone else. Never in a pressuring way, but it'd just be like, hey, we've got some beer, we've got some soda, we've got some water, whatever you want to drink. Somebody offered me a Not Your Father's root beer. And I was like, hell yeah, I love root beer. Let's try that. And it was great. Later that weekend, I was offered this pumpkin cider ale, and it was good too. I thought to myself, you know what? I'm a fucking adult. I'm almost 30. I'm past the time in my life where I'm making super rash decisions without thinking them through. If I want to occasionally drink with some folks, I'm going to do that. And I did that. I almost never had alcohol in the house, but I'd go out to bars sometimes, or I'd buy some Angry Orchard or some Not Your Father's, and I'd have a few. And I started playing roller derby. Most of my team likes to party, so I did it a little more often. I even learned a little about how to not sound like a child when ordering at the bar. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. I did the pandemic hobbies thing like a lot of people did. I even made a few episodes out of those hobbies. There was one in particular that started to scare me a little. And it's something I don't think I've talked about on the show before. I learned a lot about mixology. That's the art and science of mixing alcoholic drinks. I got into a few YouTube channels, how to drink, cocktail chemistry. After giving to some mutual aid funds, I even used some of my stimulus money to buy some fancy alcohol. I figured out, by the way, that rye whiskey is my favorite, still is. If you know anything about cocktails, you know there are like hundreds, maybe thousands of different recipes. You can experiment, play around with all kinds of different stuff to mix and match flavors, textures, scents, and so on. There's always something new and interesting to try. And when you're stuck at home, new and interesting is tough to come by. And of course, the bonus is I am a lightweight. 1 cocktail, I'm tipsy. 2, I'm drunk. 3, I'm wasted. I am a cheap date. I started down a bit of a slippery slope. Over time, I caught myself more and more often saying something like, well, COVID's a thing. I obviously don't have anywhere to be tonight. I'm going to get drunk. I don't have the money to spend on the good stuff with any regularity, so I'd get some cheap liquor, some Fireball, some vodka, something like that, some soda, and I'd have a night. And when something bad would happen, I'd be like, well, I feel like shit. Let's drink about it. My anxiety got worse, and I started saying that more often. Like I said, I'm a wee bit impulsive. So when that thought entered my head, there wasn't really much that was going to talk me out of it. Work's done for the day. Obviously don't have anywhere to be. Most nights I'm either on the couch watching shows with Celeste or on Zoom watching shows on Netflix Watch Party with my friends. Pretty soon it got to the point where if there was alcohol in the house, I was gonna drink that night. It didn't bother me when I ran out. If there was nothing in the house, it wasn't like I was craving it or anything, but like if my eyes saw it in the house, my brain would be like, yeah, let's fucking go. I know myself well enough to recognize that pattern of behavior. I mentioned earlier that there are a ton of recovering alcoholics in my family. I'd mostly left that thought behind. But also until that point, I didn't have an anxiety disorder, and the world didn't feel completely on fire every day. The slope slipped even more. found myself thinking, okay, I'm going to be responsible here. I'm going to get some alcohol, but I'm going to buy a small amount that won't last past tonight. I'll feel good, I'll have a good time. When it's not there tomorrow, I won't want to do it again. But then I'd be out at the grocery store, on the way to a doctor's visit. I'd pass by the store and I'd think, yeah, I'll get some, just for tonight. And you can probably predict the rest. The saving grace is that for me, the kind of intoxicant didn't really seem to matter. Like, I found a hookup for some cannabis, and when I got high, I didn't want to drink. But getting high also made me want to eat so much food I felt like shit. And I'm not talking about like diet culture, I feel guilty because I ate bullshit. I'm talking like I would eat so much that it would make me physically feel bad. And so for the last few months, I made sure I had cannabis available and no snack foods in the house. So I'd get high most nights, I'd want some snacks, I wouldn't have any available, I'd shrug and I'd call it a night. Sometimes I'd DoorDash some ice cream or something, but most nights I'd just end up watching Star Trek and tweeting in Klingon until I fell asleep. And that became the pattern. I was trying to give myself grace, because it's a pandemic. Climate change is making all kinds of awful shit happen, a bunch of my friends are going through hard stuff. It just felt like almost everyone was suffering. And as long as I wasn't putting myself at serious risk, I gave myself permission to cope with whatever got the job done. I know the symptoms of withdrawal and addiction well. I did a ton of research. I was aware that I had already exhibited a few. And so I kept a very close eye on my behavior. I was ready to ask for help if I started drinking, even though it made me feel like shit. If I felt the need to drink during the workday. If I started to miss deadlines because of it. If I started doing things that hurt people. And thankfully, none of that happened. But of course, that became another thing for my anxiety brain to worry about. Another thing on the already big pile of stuff for me to freak out over. Another delicate balance to maintain. At the end of the day, what's at the core of this? I feel bad, and I don't want to feel bad anymore. It really is that simple. What was making me feel bad? A whole lot of stuff that I felt like I had zero control over. My first round of meds had my acute anxiety pretty well under control. I wasn't doing a ton of catastrophizing. I didn't hear a creak in my house and think it was going to fall down or something like that. I was able to talk myself down from that sort of thing. But they don't really make a medication for existential dread. I felt like I was in the midst of chaos. My life had no structure. And anytime I tried to create one, it fell apart after a few days. I'd get a week at most. It was impossible for me to focus. My work batteries ran out very fast. And then I'd feel like shit for not getting enough done. Then I'd feel like shit for not being able to fix that. So when I feel bad, you know what I did? So I shot a message to my psych nurse. When I started seeing her, my primary complaint was anxiety. I also thought that I may have ADHD, just based on a lay reading of the symptoms. We did our assessment, and she told me that I didn't fit the diagnostic criteria for ADHD because my symptoms didn't present in childhood. She also said there was a pretty good chance getting my anxiety under control would help those problems. And for a while, I thought it had. But when I took a long, hard look at how I was spending my days, there is no doubt that those problems were not fixed. So I told her that I really needed to get something figured out. And thank Christ she had a quick appointment for me. So we talked about it. And at our first appointment, when she asked me about my focus and concentration problems, I told her they didn't happen in childhood. She had literally asked me the question that way. Did these problems happen before you were 11? And I said no. But she asked me different questions this time, more specific questions. And it dawned on me. I did have some of these problems in childhood. When I was a kid, it was difficult for me to pay attention unless I was really interested in a thing. My parent-teacher conferences often had the phrase, well, dead name is a pleasure to have in class, but ... and then something about how my attention would wander, how I wasn't maybe applying myself. I managed to get good grades for the most part, though, and We don't ask questions about success. My psych nurse told me that she could still prescribe me medication for my attention problems without an ADHD diagnosis. She just had fewer options, and I was like, hell yeah, let's try something, anything. So she told me about Wellbutrin. She gave me a rundown of what it does, told me that it's pretty successful for a lot of folks, so it's usually what she starts with. And I was like, fuck yeah, let's go, let's do it. So I got a prescription, went in to pick it up the next day. I drove to the pharmacy at like 10 a.m., took my first dose as soon as I got back to the car, and by the time I got home, I felt it working. I was surprised by that. My brain suddenly felt ordered. Normally, if I do anything in between my morning routine and my workday is ruined. I simply cannot turn on work brain after I've left the house and come back. Or if I get a morning phone call, or if I get into a silly social media argument, it's next to impossible for me to switch gears back into work brain. But when I got home from the pharmacy that day, without thinking about it, I opened my laptop, loaded my audio software, and I got to work. I was an hour into editing before I realized what was happening, and I cried. And after I was done crying, I made a cup of coffee and got right back to work. What the fuck is happening? This last Sunday, we had our first derby practice in 15 months. I was euphoric. Not just happy, but euphoric. I was being silly and slap happy in a way that I recognized was odd for me. I wondered if that was the medication too, but being better at focus and concentration isn't a thing that should help my moods like that, right? But I got home and I did some Googling on Wellbutrin, and I found out that its primary use is as a depression medication. My psych nurse mentioned that attention problems are an off-label use for it, but either she didn't say what the main use was, or she did and I don't remember. But I guess that explains the improvement in my mood too. Amazing. This is great. So fast forward again to this very week on Monday or Tuesday. It's been a rainy one here in Cincinnati. It's been just kind of a gloomy, shitty week. During a particularly bad downpour, I happened to look outside and my stomach dropped into my feet. My driveway was flooding. A few years ago this happened, and it flooded our basement, ruined our carpet, and was generally a fucking nightmare. I went into panic mode. I ran into the garage, and there was water coming in. I ran outside to look at the drain in our driveway. It was frantically sweeping the water away to see why the water wasn't draining. And I realized it wasn't draining because of all the dirt and leaves and shit sitting on top of the drain. So I got all of that out of the way, the water drained, and all was well. But I was wet, cold, extremely pissed off. Mostly at myself. I guess I'm just bad at having a house. I should have done a better job keeping an eye on that. Crisis averted though. I took a shower, sat back down to finish my work for the day. Now, when something bad happens and I decide to drink or get high about it, there are two things that happen. There's the internal monologue that says, I feel like shit, I'm gonna get fucking obliterated tonight. And there's also this feeling in my body. It's hard to describe. It's a pulling sort of feeling. It's like my body's saying, yeah, bring on the happy chemicals, bitch, let's fucking go. But this time I sat down after realizing all was well and I could breathe. My internal monologue said, I'm finishing this edit and I'm going to the goddamn liquor store. But there was no body feeling. There was no pulling. There was no screaming for the happy chemical. In fact, by that point, I had come down from panic and anger to slight annoyance. I almost always had to either drink that feeling away or sleep it away. Instead, I was noticing how good my clean, warm socks felt. I was thinking about how warm my blanket was. I was thinking about what I wanted for dinner. Is this how it's supposed to work? When something bad happens and things turn out okay, you just take care of it, have a calm down period and just like return to life? What is this sorcery? There's a muscle memory at this point for how I used to cope with those situations. There was a part of me that felt like I was supposed to be still pissed off and anxious and worried. I wanted to frown because 2 weeks ago that would have happened. Something like that was supposed to ruin my entire day, but it just didn't. Instead, I made a super tasty omelet, watched Star Trek, and played with Wedge. I even turned on that Deftones record. I feel like I'm probably going to end up with an ADHD diagnosis. While I'm not married to wanting any particular diagnosis, I know it's easier to get treatment when you have one. But I feel so good right now, and I'm not sure I want to change anything. The chaos has quieted. Not completely, but enough. I'm focused. I'm alert. I feel like I'm in control. I don't feel led by every impulsive thought that enters my head. I don't plan to stop getting drunk or high forever, but I feel like I'll probably only do it when I'm hanging out with friends. I finally feel like I might be getting my shit together. Thank you, my friend, for listening. If you want to help keep this thing going, please consider heading over to patreon.com/queersplaining and making a pledge to support the show. Another great way to help is to share the show with your friends, share us out on social media, text a friend, shout about it to a stranger from a safe social distance or closer if you're vaccinated, whatever's your thing. It all helps and it's all appreciated. Before I go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things, and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friend, my name is Callie Wright, and this is Queersplaining.